Hi, my name is Danica, and today I want to give you the Sapphic Books news report. So I run the Lesbian, which is a bi and lesbian literature blog, and every 2 weeks I round up all the latest links about bi and lesbian books on the rest of the internet, so reviews and also just news and interesting things, and I kind of curate it into what I think is the most interesting, and I also share more on my Twitter. I've been doing this for quite a few years now, but I thought it might be fun to do a little video component. So I want to talk about what I think are some of the most interesting links that I've come across this month, especially since it's Pride Month. There's been so much content, especially on sites where they don't always have a lot of queer content, which I always feel a little bit conflicted about. I'm glad that there is this much content happening, but I do wish it would spread out a little bit through the year. So I'll get into it. Some of the things I think are especially worth checking out that have been in this month's link roundup. So I will link my links roundups down in the description if you want more information about any of these. So obviously Autostraddle is always doing amazing queer woman content all year round, and lately they've started this Perfect Queer Poem series. So the latest ones are For When You Don't Know If You Want to Be Her or Fuck Her, and The Perfect Queer Poem for Facing Our Enemies. These are in-depth readings of queer poems, which is really cool because it's not something that I see outside of academia, really. So it's been a long time since I've seen a really in-depth poem analysis because I don't really seek them out. So I've really been enjoying this series. The first one that I mentioned has to do with HD, who is a bisexual poet, and it's kind of about her coming to terms with her bisexuality. She always felt like it was very conflicted, these two sides of her, and it's about sort of seeing this as a cohesive whole instead of these two battling sides of her. So if you didn't know, I also write for Book Riot, so obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think Book Riot is great and it has a lot of queer content throughout the year as well, but they've especially been posting some stuff for Pride, and one of the things I wanted to highlight was a quiz you can take that's what fun queer book should you read this summer. I didn't create it, I'm not self-promoting here. And probably the biggest queer lit news this month was that the Lambda Literary Awards were announced, and I was actually a judge this year's Lambda Literary Awards, which was amazing and such an honor, and also, oh my god, so much reading. I ended up falling a bit behind, and by the end I had to read a book a day, which was very intense to get through, but it was a really cool experience, and you should definitely check out the winners. There's some really great books that were highlighted, and of course LGBTQ Reads, run by Dahlia Adler, is always a great place to check out. She always has so many great things happening there to do with queer YA, and this month she had a lot of TBR Rainbow alerts, which are about upcoming queer books that you should be aware of. So she had one for memoirs, for YA and new adult rom-coms, YA starring queer people of color, and upcoming graphic novels. So those are always a great way to keep up to date with the queer books that are coming out. And speaking of that, LGBTQ Reads also put out a new releases for June post, and so did Lambda Literary. So if you're looking for new queer books that were out this month, definitely check out those posts. Another thing I saw of a lot this month was Yuri content. So OKazu is always doing really cool things around Yuri, including a lot of reviews and think pieces and the history of the genre and things like that. So some of the interesting content that went up, this was on Anime Feminist, was the Beginner's Guide to Yuri manga and a post about Is Yuri Queer? And I really recommend checking those out, especially if you haven't read a lot of Yuri manga and you're not sure where to start or what it really is. Those would be a good introduction point. And like I was saying, because it's June, we're seeing a lot of content from websites that don't always showcase queer lit content, but there's some really interesting articles to check out. There are a couple that were about LGBTQ bookstores, so one on The Bookshop in Australia and one on Giovanni's Room in Philadelphia, and they're talking about the role that these bookstores play in the community, especially with teens. So those are really interesting to check out. I am lucky to live pretty close to one of the oldest LGBTQ bookstores in North America, I think, definitely in Canada, and I think it's such a big part of our queer community to have these stores. So if you have any nearby, you should definitely frequent them. keep them alive. There was also a post on Vice about the Lesbian History Archives, which I really, really, really want to see at some point in my life. They have so many artifacts from lesbian history, including tons of lesbian pulp and books. So this article is called The First Lesbian Porn and a Japanese Dictionary, and 9 other revealing artifacts from the Lesbian History Archives. So if you're interested at all in that, the link will be in the roundup. There's also a really interesting think piece about Theodora from The Haunting of Hill House and her enduring legacy, especially as a queer-coded character and then explicitly queer in the Netflix remake. And this is a book and a character that I'm really interested in. There's so much subtext there, and I think it really interweaves through the story. I think it's a really supporting part of the story. So I was really glad to see an article about that. And finally, there were a couple of posts that were talking about a US First Lady who had a decades-long romantic relationship with another woman. When I saw the headlines, I thought, yeah, we all know about Eleanor Roosevelt, but actually this is another US First Lady. So if you are not familiar with that, definitely check that out. And they are about a recent publication of these love letters between the two women that had been previously unpublished. And finally, I thought I would share some of the individual books that were reviewed or talked about in these roundups that I am interested in. There's When I Arrived at the Castle by Emily Carroll. She wrote the graphic novel Into the Woods, which was amazing, so creepy, not explicitly queer as far as I can remember, but she is a queer author, and this newest one is a lesbian vampire graphic novel, which I'm so looking forward to, but I'm actually gonna hold on to it and keep it until October to read because I think it would be such a perfect spooky read for October, and I like making my October themed. There's also a new book called Mostly Dead Things by Kristen Arnett, which has been getting a lot of attention, and it is about a lesbian taxidermist and her kind of weird family dynamics set in Florida. It seems super weird and interesting. It's definitely on my list, and it looks like it's getting a lot of acclaim, including outside of queer book circles, so it's always great to see a book like that getting some popular attention. Another book getting a lot of attention right now is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and illustrated by Rosemary Valero O'Connell. I've really found Mariko Tamaki's books super interesting, so I am looking forward to reading this one. It looks like it's about an unhealthy relationship between 2 high school girls, and I have heard only good things, so I'm excited to get into it. And that is the Bi and Lesbian Lit news and reviews this month. Obviously there are way more links in the link roundup, which I will include down below. These were just some of my highlights of what I think is new and interesting. Also, let me know if you think this should be a regular feature. Should I do this every month? I spend a lot of time on these link roundups, so I'd always like to see them get a little bit more attention because I love to promote everything that is happening around Bi and Lesbian Lit online, especially because we're seeing so much more as time goes on and so much more high quality, in-depth analysis and interesting takes on this topic. So let me know about any of that in the comments, and thank you for watching.